Please bring him on. He's a distinguished board-certified ER doctor in L.A. Studied global health at Georgetown University. He has a medical degree from Ben Gurion University. Completed his residency training in emergency medicine at Lincoln Medical Center in the South Bronx. Former United States Peace Corps volunteer. Come on, Michael Daignault, everyone. Dr. Michael Daignault. Look at you, you handsome fool. I love it.
How are you?
Welcome.
Good to see you.
It's so great to have you here, and thank you for being in a playful way and allowing us to make you wait for a minute or two. But I do want to get into some stuff, and I'm excited to have a real medical opinion that matters on issues involving. First, we'll try the big stuff. Okay, I'll get to bird flu and where we are and all of that, but I want to ask you about sort of this big stuff that seems to be affecting the CDC, NIH. Medical research, medical issuance of advisories, and public statements that need to be attached to policy. I wonder if you could speak to this freeze on the CDC and NIH and funding associated with research and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us in public health and medicine were totally shocked, particularly when we've had the CDC's morbidity and mortality report come out every week for 70 years and not have it last week. It was absolutely shocking. I mean, we look forward to reading that every week to see what the current trends are in disease, to see what new policy recommendations are coming up. I track that just to look, locally and nationally, how many people are coming to the ER for various infectious disease. And right now that's, COVID, it's RSV, it's the flu, it's norovirus, and just policy papers and data and research studies that they've been doing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, as you mentioned. I mean, freezing any kind of research that's being done at NIH. I mean, for scientists and people that are doing research, it takes a long time to go through this process, to get funding, to recruit participants for the study, to analyze their data. And it's a multi-year process because we try to put out great, solid research that's evidence-based medicine for people to consume and then make policy decisions on that. And so, just suddenly stopping that for political reasons is unheard of, as I mentioned, and really puts us at a disadvantage.
I'd always understood that the CDC was unique in all the world in the way in which it brings together some of the great medical minds and some of the great medical expertise worldwide in this one organization. Is that true? It's kind of been viewed now. I mean, I understand it's not an organization without issues. I mean, even I, as a layperson, have read a lot of stuff, and I know that there are both political aspects and even commercial aspects, maybe to medicine and even the CDC's administrative decision making. But all of that said, we should, at least prior to this moment, respect what the CDC is and what its mission statement is.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think this, in the same vein of, if as a new administration you have issues with how a federal organization is run, in the same vein as when we look at the Trump administration decision to pull out of the WHO, instead of pulling out, conduct an internal review, bring your concerns to the group. Bring your concerns to the CDC, bring your concerns to the WHO board and say, this is what we're worried about. We didn't think this was handled right. Can we conduct a review from the inside, as opposed to pulling ourselves out of an organization? And the same way with the CDC, yeah, no federal organization is perfect, but I think then, you have to look at everything as a whole. I mean, a lot of people, these are their day-to-day jobs as well. And, to send people home or to tell them not to show up to their job. Let me just give you another example. Over the weekend, since a lot of these websites went dark, we weren't able to access certain links that we use in the ER in the hospital to get pertinent information on how to manage bacterial infections. So we call that antimicrobial stewardship, or to look up vaccine schedule. I mean, I had a young patient in the ER, and I wanted to check where they were in the vaccine schedule and go to the usual link, and it wasn't there. And that's the pediatric vaccine schedule that we've had for however many number of years. It says at this point you get these vaccines, at this point you get the other ones, and it just wasn't there anymore. And that was just absolutely mind blowing. I mean, I had to do some significant digging in order to find that, whereas before things were just so much more easily available to us.
It's interesting. I'm seeing in the chat here too that, and I suppose this is true. Randy says the CDC lost credibility during COVID. I don't know that. I mean, clearly that's true. I mean, COVID became a watershed moment for a lot of reasons. The CDC might have been the locus of it, and then on one level, but it had obviously ripple effects. People literally voted for Trump this past election. Because of what they felt was a COVID policy that they didn't agree with. They're anti-vaxxers. They didn't want to be forced because of the mandates, the mask, et cetera. They voted against the Democrats and brought in Trump, even though the odd thing is Trump created the vaccine. It was done under his stewardship. But be that as it may, speak to the CDC and how kind of muddied up and dirtied up their reputation has become, deserved or not, I mean, because of COVID.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's been unfortunate. And just to go back to my example with Trump trying to pull us out of WHO, his reasoning in his executive order was he didn't like how he felt the CDC had sort of coddled China at the very beginning of the outbreak and not releasing all the information that they thought they had. And again, if you think that that is true, and again, we had last week that CIA report, based on, low strength of intelligence that COVID came from a lab leak. Okay, let's explore that through the WHO, because if you pull yourselves out of WHO, who do you think is the next country in line that has funded the WHO with the most amount of money? It's China. And so it doesn't make sense to me that you're saying, well, we're pulling ourselves out of WHO because we're worried about what China and WHO had provided the public for information at the very beginning. But then you leave this power vacuum and funding vacuum that other countries can take over. So, no, but to answer your question about the CDC, I mean, I think so much of what has happened with the Trump administration and what they're doing with the healthcare in this country and the CDC is he's appealing to his base that didn't like what they felt was CDC overreaching during, the COVID epidemic and the COVID pandemic. And so, it's a lot of appealing to that, but I just think it's a little bit too much too fast, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that it's been amplified in ways that we've seen. And by the way, I made the very same point you just made, which always makes me feel good because you're a real medical professional. When the WHO decision was made early on, this is years ago now, the idea somehow that you should pull back. China did probably have, in my judgment, too big a seat at the table when it came to the World Health Organization. They had an oversized influence based on the amount of money they had in there. It really is a money game. As you said, it was America and it was China. We were really the two big brothers as associated with the WHO. But the idea somehow that you could pull back, it's a little of what's happening. We're seeing in a grander way with Trump and the rest of the world. There's an isolationism building, and I don't want to bring you into our politics here, but essentially, you do leave a vacuum. You can feel as though by pulling back, you're teaching everybody a lesson, but the reality is they go on without you, and now you're not a part of policy, and you're not a part of crafting any sort of strategy moving forward. And when you talk about world health, I mean, that's a real big vacuum. And so to bird flu. This is an emerging issue worldwide. I wonder if you can speak to the general state of things and how you see this sort of emerging as you might game it out.
Yeah, so, I've been tracking this since March 2024. That was the first time that we detected bird flu in our livestock. And it was in Texas and a number of other states. And just for our viewers and the listeners, bird flu, as the name suggests, or avian flu, it's H5N1 and usually found among wild birds and flocks. But what has happened is the virus has sort of gotten into the livestock, either through the feeds or the water source. And then once it's in the livestock, and currently in the country right now, California leads with over 700 herds infected, by far more than any other state. And so people don't really understand the way that herds move interstate. And so, and the workers too, that could go from farm to farm and actually be inadvertently spreading this as well. And so right now, you look at the price of eggs, a lot of that is being driven by how much poultry population that has had to be culled because of bird flu. And so going back to what you're saying, in the broader scheme of things of global health and the WHO, if we remove ourselves from the WHO, we're sort of flying blind. We're not going to have access to the information that the governing body, other countries are contributing, scientists are contributing regarding bird flu. And I just feel like we're heading down the path of, we didn't really learn much from COVID, for example. And it's shocking to me because it's the same administration or the same president that was here at the beginning of COVID. And this is somebody, as you mentioned, who started Operation Warp Speed, funded the vaccines, but now wants to eliminate the White House Office of Pandemic Preparedness, which would be a huge disaster. And so what I see is happening, and what we're doing on the local level at my hospital, a little company of Mary in Torrance, we were one of the first hospitals and ERs to develop a protocol to start screening patients for bird flu, just because I felt like, from what I learned from COVID, I didn't want to be behind the 8 ball, and I wanted us to be much more aggressive in looking for it. And as you remember, back in December, LA County had its first case of bird flu in a human. And, as I mentioned, the amount of herds that we have in California with bird flu, it's not going to be a surprise if we see more patients come with it. And so our screening protocol is very simple. Any adult, working age adult who comes in with flu-like symptoms, which is a lot right now, we ask them, hey, do you work in the livestock or poultry industry? Because 63 out of 66 cases in the country right now are in people that work in the livestock industry. And so it's a simple protocol that we can do to help identify them. And the one other thing I just wanted to add is, my big concern with this is that we had one case in Louisiana of a patient with severe COVID illness. The rest of them have been mild. In that patient, when they looked at the genetics of the bird flu virus that this patient had, it had already shown mutations that allowed bird flu to infect the upper airways of humans. And that those mutations occurred while that patient was infected with bird flu. And so what we don't want is for this virus, through enough infecting livestock workers, for example, to develop the ability to spread from human to human. And the more we just let this go on and not really take proactive action against it, we're going to pay on the back end.
That's fascinating. The notion somehow never occurred to me. I don't know why, but that you are compromised by one flu, and that opens you up to being compromised further by a second infection. How do you get the bird flu? Asks, just give me the truth. Can you tell us how we get it? I mean, we don't want to get it. I don't want, but how we avoid it and how we contract it.
Well, to answer your question, in that particular patient, they got the bird flu from an infected flock in his backyard. He wasn't even a livestock worker. All right, and so while he was infected with this severe illness, and this happens with any virus, the virus mutates or can mutate within the person during the course of the illness as it's replicating, making you sicker, causing your symptoms. And virus replication is imperfect, meaning that there's a lot of accidental mutations that happen, and those viruses can be better adept at infecting the upper airways of humans. And so what we don't want is for somebody to have like a livestock worker. This is worst case scenario. A livestock worker gets not vaccinated against seasonal flu, gets the flu, and then gets bird flu. And at the same time, you have both viruses in your body. They mutate, the virus mutates, develops an ability to infect human to human. And then we're really in trouble, because from what we know about H5N1, the mortality rate is 50%.
Wow.
So
scary.
Yeah, but
I'm sorry, go ahead, but what?
Yeah, I mean, just the other main point I want to make about this is that compared to COVID, we're not completely unprepared. We have, I think the last time I checked, 10 million doses of H5N1 vaccine already stockpiled. And even last year, when I was on Fox 11 with Marla, I would always say, why don't we vaccinate our livestock workers against H5N1 now? Because you can do just this small amount at the front end and prevent this from taking off. And nobody wants to see another COVID pandemic or another pandemic like we dealt with before. You know, we're still, I think a lot of us in healthcare especially are still having PTSD from the last one. And so, you know, it's a simple thing that we can do now to prevent this from getting out of control.
So it's vaccinations that represent the potential when it comes to bird flu, and yet we have a policy that may be emerging from the new government and new administration that may stand in the way of an aggressive vaccine policy. As you say, it's kind of bizarre because the last guy was Trump, who I thought it was to his credit. I said it on the air. I said, I don't care what you think of Trump. He powered up this vaccine, threw a lot of money at it, and then you got into vaccine policy and basic American freedoms, and you can't tell me, blah, 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 et cetera. And I don't mean to diminish that. That was, as I say, it influenced an election probably. But when it comes to the bird flu vaccine, how will people get it? What might a rollout look like? How bad does it have to get? What's the threshold after which they would say, okay, it's time to start vaccinating the population?
From what I read, I think the thinking as far as policy is that they won't release these stockpiles until it becomes human to human, which at that point, the genie's already out of the bottle. Why don't we just vaccinate the small amount of people that work in livestock and poultry first? Sure. And then it'll never get a foothold. It'll never learn to mutate so that it can spread human to human. And then if we do that, then we won't need the entire population to be vaccinated in the first place.
That seems like such an easy ask. Yes. I don't know why it's not being acted upon. I really don't know.
Politics. Last year when we had the vaccines and the Biden administration purchased, I think, an additional 4 million doses. We could have done it then, and I was really hoping they would have thought to do that before the end of the administration. But now I'm a little.
Yeah, I know it's a different game. I'm going to ask you a question that came up in the confirmation hearings for RFK Jr. in our last minute here, and that is sort of, in the old days we only had 8 vaccines. We had smallpox, polio, hit the big ones, MMR, etc. Now you've got 46 vaccines on the schedule. That can't be anything more than a grab by big pharma and the vaccine makers. Could you speak to whether or not there's some truth to that, total truth to that, or no truth to that?
I mean, that's fact. There are more vaccines against childhood illness and other diseases now than ever before. And, whether somebody thinks that is a bad thing or not, if you just look at the history and you look at the charts for how many people were sick with these different diseases over history, and then all of a sudden it just stopped right when the vaccines came on board. I think that speaks for itself. And, from an ER doctor point of view, the way healthcare is set up in this country, that it's so difficult for people to access primary care now. And the ER has sort of become the last refuge for people seeking healthcare. We don't want an influx of more patients that are sick coming in than there already is. And, the people that I see, for example, for flu, right now we see a lot of flu A, which is the seasonal flu variant, like every shift up and down the hallway. 99% of those patients are unvaccinated. I mean, I may have had 1 or 2 that were vaccinated that had mild symptoms because they got the flu vaccine, but these things work. And if you look at the development of mRNA vaccines that we had for COVID, unfortunately it's gotten such a bad rep, but people don't realize what an amazing advancement, as you mentioned, this was, that it's so easy for companies to just update any kind of vaccine that's an mRNA-based profile to a seasonal variant of COVID, for example, and then looking at potential future applications for cancer. It's so easy to update that, and in 2 to 3 months roll it out. And we could have been looking at a lot of great advancements with this technology if it hadn't just gotten so politicized recently.
Dr. D, I love that we covered a handful of topics here. I mean, they're super contemporary. I mean, everything from bird flu to the shutdown of the CDC, pulling out of the WHO. I mean, these are all things that are literally just happening in the last 10 days and reaching thresholds that really deserve discussion. I can't wait to have you back. I hope you'll be a regular visitor and appreciate all the insight you have. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to be back. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Daignault is Michael Daignault is an ER doctor. He's got to scrub down right now and get out there. Thank you, Dr. Daignault. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.